it says recording. Woo, we're recording. I hope you're ready. All right. How's it going, folks? Good evening. This is Nick, and this is episode, I don't even know, I think 60-something, 61, 62, I think, somewhere around there. This is one of those weeks where we've actually recorded a couple of episodes, so that really throws our numbering off because, you know, we can't even guesstimate very well. So Tim will not be joining us tonight, it doesn't seem. Kind of a rough day at the office. We've been busy. We had a recording, as I said, last night. I woke up early this morning thinking that we were recording again, just to realize that was actually for next week. So, yeah, that's how that is. So tonight I will be talking with Des Brennan, which he says is a very good, strong Irish last name. From Arcanum Games, right? I said that right, yes.
Grand Arcanum Games.
Grand Arcanum Games. See, I had it, your background had it on your site, and apparently it changes when I...
well, in the last 15 seconds, we went grand. We were just normal,
yeah.
And now we went grand.
oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
No, it's just the background changed as I clicked on it. From having the Grand Arcanum, I was like, darn it, I lost it. Now I've got to try and remember his name and the name of the company. All right, and so tonight we're here to talk with Des about his game, The Roots of Magic. So, Des, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Glad to have you on. Always glad to have, indies and small companies on because there's just some really awesome and really neat things that are always popping up, coming out.
Really are at the moment.
Yeah, especially at the moment. It's and we were talking before the show. Mutual acquaintance Ash Barker, and one of the things that I hear him say a lot is, we're kind of in a golden age of games right now, and we really are. It's problematic, especially for me. I have a Kickstarter problem, and so I'm always like, "Ooh, shiny, yes, back!" And have to fight that monster, as painful as it is, to keep it reasonable and stuff like that.
It's a dangerous addiction.
It is because it's. It's just there's so much awesome stuff always coming out. It just, for example, Star Eagles came out today, and it's a space fighter game, and it looks awesome. But I'm already getting off topic, and we haven't even touched the topic yet.
If it wasn't for the fact my computer is very loud for typing, and I'll ruin the recording, I'd already be looking up what that game was. But I'll save that one for later myself. I'm just like I imagine yourself and a number of your listeners. I play loads of games. I'm always on the lookout for cool new games, and Kickstarter is generally one of the easier ways for small companies or very small companies like myself. Like there's many one-man bands. I'm a one-man outfit, really. It's the best way to do it, and perhaps even the only way to do it for some of us. But we are living in a golden age, and I'm taking advantage of that to do something that I think quite a lot of people have always wanted to do, which is make your own game.
That is awesome. I love the way we brought this right back around to on target. All right, so The Roots of Magic. I've looked at it a little bit, and I had it explained to me really briefly, but you launch in and tell the listeners what is The Roots of Magic.
No problems. Very simple concept. The Roots of Magic is a wizard dueling skirmish game. It currently involves potentially one model per side, the wizard model, and players will take one or more of the models, which represents houses of magic, each with their own particular different styles of playing in the game, and just try and throw down and figure out who's got the strongest style, who's got the cleverest schemes and strategies to try and hoodwink over the other guy or girl, as it may be. As there's only one model in the game, you're investing a lot of your time and your effort and your thought into what this one model can do, where it's going to be, how it's going to do it. And, even though it's only one model, it's extremely in-depth because we've opened up the rules to try and make sure that the model can do so many different things. And at any one time, there's, 10 great things that the model could do. And it's yours to try and figure out what that will be and how you can engineer a situation for your opponent where you're going to get the upper hand and they're going to eat the dirt. So very simple 1v1 model game in a very small space, 2x2 board, but you don't even technically need anything that big. And it's just your wizard beating 10 bells out of the other wizard.
Awesome. So it's wizards dueling wizards, but as I look at your site and your store, I do notice that there is one lady who also has a bear.
Yeah, well, she's a wizard with a bear. That's a familiar, by the way.
Right.
Most of the wizards don't have a familiar, but she's a particularly stubborn, ornery old lady who lives in the wood by herself because she doesn't really like anyone else. Thinks she knows best, and has a big, hairy, furry companion. In the game, she gets to fight with a grizzly bear on her side versus other people that might have a stick on their side. So, you can tell which one you'd rather be, right? The grizzly bear loaded.
Well, yeah, I definitely feel like, having the grizzly bear might be a definite smart move on my side.
Yeah, the game is it takes roughly, depending on how familiar you are with the rules, it takes anywhere from about 25 to 45 minutes to play a game. Newer players will take a bit longer than that as they kind of go through the rules, but I designed it to try and be a very simple game that has a lot of tactical depth behind it. So each player kind of determines initiative in each game round, which can vary depending on your role and your basic stats, and then they'll get a set number of actions that they can take. What's a little bit different about my game, and I'm not sure how many other games out there are like this, but there are so many, there's probably some, is that there's a variable number of actions that your models generate depending on where they're placed, what they're doing, and how they do it. The backstory for the game, in case anyone is interested in that kind of thing, is that in this fantasy world, mankind has lost magic, with the exception of this one continent where, through a quirk of fate, the land itself is suffused with magic, and the wizards, and I'm kind of doing the air commas that obviously you can't see, but the wizards can draw magic out of the ground via the roots of magic and fuel magical spells, which they, because they're not really channeling magic in the truest sense, they're not really capable of drawing in the tremendous power that exists in the ground. They can only kind of draw out a flavor, or in the game we call it a root. So an example of a root is the root of fear, for example, which is the magic of terror, the ability to inspire visions and bodily functions that are associated with terror. So increased heart rate, make you see ghosts and spirits and other terrifying things. Or there's something called the root of suggestion, which is the ability to magically implant ideas in your head that sound very good. You do the idea, it sounds great, then you wake up and you've done some really quite terrible things and it wasn't a great idea at all. But it seemed really good at the time. And so each of the wizards...
That just sounds like drinking.
Well, yeah. There's no magic involved in that, though. Just
I don't know.
A lot of money spent in the bar, but the magic happens when you've had a few, but then rapidly revolves back to the mundane once you sober up. So yeah, just exactly like that, actually. So maybe I should look into that. Each one of the wizards, as I said, will draw on a different kind of flavor of magic. I mean, there have been games where there are different schools of magic, going back probably before D&D and stuff like that. And in my world, I just wanted them to be slightly different. So they're kind of different points on the emotional compass. So you've got things like the ability to suggest or be charismatic, the ability to terrify, the ability to dominate, the ability to inspire, and they all have various different names. There are many more than that, but they all have various different cool names, and your wizard will draw on that particular route and no other route. So spells tend to be unique across wizards or factions, and they'll try and use their ones to beat up on the other guy.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no. Go ahead. That was a natural break, even though I said That was a natural break for me.
All right. So you mentioned initiative, which usually is kind of a key thing in the game, but you mentioned the dice and all that. So what kind of dice system does it use?
No problem. It's a D10, which is pretty fashionable at the moment. It's going through a bit of a renaissance because, I don't know, I have a massive collection of D10 sitting in my house, and I just happen to like rolling D10. Anything more is a bit too unwieldy, I think. But yeah, it's a D10-based action game in which, in order to make it as simplistic as possible, you roll one dice, and it's targeted against a certain value on the opposing model, but the number of dice you roll will increase the efficacy of your abilities and your actions. So in order to keep it very, very simple to follow, it's just the one roll, but you're creating a pool of dice, and the more dice that you can roll, the more effective the action will be. Just like, I guess, for people that have had the misfortune of being in a fight, if someone hits you in the shoulder, it's annoying, but it doesn't necessarily take you down. And in the game, if someone hits you with one dice, that's annoying. You can be distracted, and that can give you a little bit of a penalty, a debuff. But if someone hits you with maybe 5 or 6 hits, then you are going to certainly feel that, to the point of, could potentially be fatal. So D10 against a very simple characteristic system, which is represented on character cards that each model will have, that each model does have. And so you always know what you need to roll in order to equal or beat that roll, in order to score hits against your opponent. It's just the number of hits and whatever the ability says it does. That's where the difference comes into each model's abilities.
All right. So there's. Oh shoot! I just had it kind of counted up. There's what? 1, 2, 6, 7, 8. 8 different wizards. 8 different houses right now.
So there's currently 8 different factions in the game, 8 different wizards. There's a few extra models here and there which can confuse as to how many factions there are, but there's currently 8. 6 of them are called great houses, so they represent a school or a faction of specific magic that's associated with one route. And then there are 2 other factions as well that aren't great houses, but they have their own particular flavors of magic that work in fairly similar ways. And those are the Order of Malleoc, which are kind of like a faction of witch hunters, and demologists and banishers of unquiet spirits. And then you've got the Diabolists, who are a cult of deranged apocalypse worshipping naughty people.
Naughty people.
They're certainly naughty.
I like that. All right, so there's as you said, 6 main houses. Is there plans for more then?
Absolutely. So each of these things represent different emotions or different tropes. So they're limited only by my imagination or what I can steal. And so I've got so many sitting in development, waiting to come out. But I don't want to oversaturate factions. But literally if I want to have the drunk frat faction, then I can write a story for it and bingo, create a drunk frat wizard. Not that I'm going to do that, by the way, but there's no limit on what people like. We've got all the magical options under the sun, chronomancy, kinetomancy, all of these crazy things that don't always get a look into your average D&D game or whatever you like to play that can find a place in my game. One of the ones that will be coming up next is about kinesis, the ability to move. The more he moves, the greater the strength that he can draw on and use to fuel his spells. So he'll be one of the next ones, although probably shouldn't reveal too much about that.
Secret. All right, so secret cool things are still planned. So are you going to add more wizards to each house?
For sure. I think we had a little bit of a conversation just before we started recording. One of the things you said about another company that you've been speaking with recently is that they'd kind of pre-planned release cycles beyond what was available at release. They'd created a structure, they knew where they were going, they know how the expansions are coming, and so on and so forth, which I said was a great idea because I could sit there smirking because that's exactly what I'm doing. So there's certainly going to be more wizards for each faction because people like choice, and I've got to give people what they like in order to keep them playing and make them happy. And I'm a gamer as well. I like choice. I wouldn't want to use the same model ad infinitum. But on top of that, what I'm also doing is introducing additional models to support the wizard. Okay. At this point, I have to kind of look at the giant elephant in the room, which is Frostgrave. I started developing this game long before Frostgrave had been released or I'd even heard about it. I think someone pointed out to me only after about just almost a year that I'd been working on it. And there are certainly some similarities in the fact that it's a wizard-based game. Frostgrave is pretty much a wizard and / warband-based game, but that's really where the similarities end. My game is certainly character-driven. All of the wizards are characters. They have names. They have backstories, many of which I've released the stories on my website, therootsofmagic.com, plug. And moving forward, that's how the game is going to go, because it's a narrative-driven game with integral characters that do things in the story and whose character is changed by the evolving storyline as it goes along. So I thought I'd quickly say that before I go back to my point that I'm adding models to support wizards. So I had recently, at the end of last year, had a funded Kickstarter called The Students of Sorcery, which was to introduce apprentice wizards, or in the game we call them acolytes. For each of the wizards, we'll get an apprentice in which to help their game or to add a new element to the game or just generally be an independent badass of their own. That went very well, and currently in the middle of producing those models. We've had them all sculpted. I think there was an extra 9 or 10 models added, and we've had them all sculpted, and we're currently in the middle of having them cast and mass produced so we can get them out to backers. But that's just the first step in my aim to create a whole range of games within one game, because that's something that I've always loved whenever I've come across that, where you can be affiliated with a world, a game system, but sometimes if you want to play a different type of game, you have to leave that game system to go to another one, which is great. I do that as well, but I want to open up to people that play the game the opportunity to play a range of different skirmish levels within one system. So, you have the Wizard and Wizard Duel, which has been very, very heavily supported. I've created a number of scenarios for it. I've created a number of models for it already. And each of the scenarios that already exist, you'll be able to use the wizards that already exist, but you'll be able to add models to them, thus subtly over time changing how you play or how you can play those scenarios. and at the same time I'll be creating new scenarios that are for an expanded number of models in the game. So in addition to wizards, I'm going to have acolytes, which are the apprentices, which I've already started work on, guardians, which are kind of like bodyguards, martial bodyguards that protect these wizards from the mundane threats of this world, which is very dangerous. Servants, which indicate people that kind of follow them around and help them do their jobs. So, one of the guys is called, for example, is called Hephaestus of House Merc, the House of Fear. Their job is to be kind of police the wilds of Malorian, which is the continent where all these wizards are based, bringing evildoers to justice by making them hang themselves by sheer terror and other really lovely, sparkly things. Of course, if you're going to do that, some guy's got to bring the sack of ropes, right? So Hephaestus will have a servant called Nem the Hangman, whose job is to lovingly craft all of these ropes, which he then hands to the guilty, who are then agitated by pure terror into a state where they think it's a good idea to hang themselves to get rid of all of this misery, and therefore justice will be done. So servants will be another rank, and then there'll be basic grunt soldiers for each of the factions, not necessarily people with swords and boards. It'll be dependent on the types of factions and the way that they fight, and they'll all have completely different things, but they are effectively grunt soldiers. So the game is, ostensibly a 1 versus 1 model game that you can choose to have to be even up to 5 to 8 models per player eventually when we get there. Or not, as you choose. If some people will like playing the basic game, and some people will want to add more models in, and some people want to do a bit of a hybrid of both, and all will be supported in terms of the rules and in terms of events, because I've already started running organized play, and even the events will have, all of the games all the versions of the game will be represented. In order to be the champion of the event, you'll have to be effective at various different styles of the game.
That's kind of cool, having organized play that's going to be at different levels. Also having just the sheer, number and differences of guys that you can optionally bring with you, definitely does bring a little bit more depth and intrigue to the game. Because as you said, and as sounds kind of fun, having a guy walking around with a bag of ropes and going, "Hey, here you go. Yep, there's a tree right over there. Just
you
jump."
Look like a 7'3" rope man. So I've got. It's like you go into a clothing store. It's like you look like you're a 15-inch chest. He's like measuring you up, going, "I've got lovely rope for you. Here, take this one. It'll feel really nice." That's the kind of weirdo that this guy travels around with. But
wasn't that guy in Robin Hood Men in Tights?
I'll be stealing Prince Ruprecht.
Of course, going to funny things as you first started describing it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the band Tenacious D.
Yes.
So Wonder Boy started playing my head. Mind bullets in the power to move you.
Yeah, some of them have mind bullets and some of them have the power to move you, but no one has all of that. It's too much.
Right. As they alluded to in the song itself. All right, so musical segue, check. All right, so at the base game, it's wizard versus wizard. How does that play out?
Okay, so sometimes I kind of will gloss over that at a high level because I don't know the level of detail that people want to go into, but I'm happy to do that. Each model will generate a certain number of actions. I don't know if you're familiar with games like maybe Malifaux or anything like that. So, or maybe your listeners are familiar with Malifaux, in which, depending on the model type, you get a certain number of actions you can take per turn. Okay, what you do with those actions is your own choice within whatever limits of actions that you're allowed to take. In my game, the Roots of Magic, it's fairly similar. So, for example, a wizard gains 3 what we call mundane action points, which represent the natural wellspring of life. Living entities can do a certain number of things in a prescribed period of time. You can walk a certain distance, you can throw a certain distance, you can carry a certain load reliably within this period of time. That's what mundane action points represent. On top of that, each wizard can draw from certain points on the play area, which in the current scenarios are marked in very specific areas. They can draw extra energy via their specific route. And that energy they can either immediately use as supplementary actions on top of the 3 that they may usually get, or they can choose to kind of store them between turns. Magical energy, if you like, building up, and they can store it in amulets and rings about their body, so that in a later game round, instead of doing just a few extra things, they can do significantly more or more powerful spells. On each of the wizard comes with 2 cards. One of them I kind of mentioned before, the character card that kind of gives you the statistics of the wizard, how fast they are, how tough they are to hit, how many wounds they may take before they potentially could die. And one of the key stats is power limit, which is at the end of the card, there's a very big number, the biggest number, and that's power limit. That's how much magical energy in terms of actions they've drawn out of the ground that they can store between rounds for later use. Each of the wizards also has an action card, which has 2 different flavors. Ability actions, which represent spells that take a little bit of time to set up, so that the wizards can only use those once per round, or attack actions, in which they may use any number of times depending on how many actions they have to pay the cost of those attacks. But in addition to that, they have different scales of each ability and attacks. They have very cheap ones, which means they can use them every round without fail, provided they succeed. And they'll have some very powerful spells that will take a little bit of time to build up the power enough to use it. The basic mundane energies that humans generate aren't enough to power some of these nutty spells, so they have to draw magical energy in order to activate them. So you can do your basic ranged attack, which might be a frozen skull, or it might be a fireball, whatever it is, or you can build up over a number of turns to do your kind of a mega apocalyptic spell that will really put a significant amount of damage on the opponent. And thus, depending on the way that you like to play, do I like to play with lots of efficient small attacks, or do I like to do the big, grand-looking, crazy named Spell of Doom TM? Then that's completely up to you. But
interesting.
All be done based on the amount of actions that you've had the ability to draw out.
Right. So you mentioned that you got to draw the power from the ground, but there's only certain places on the map that you can do it, or on the game board?
That's right. So all of the scenarios have what's called a dueling circle design currently, because I wanted to get the idea that it is kind of like an arena, or it can be an arena combat type thing. In this society, wizard duels can be a spectator sport, and there are areas where people will watch them, or even turn up and have a little picnic and watch these guys murderize each other. So the design of the map is a circular dueling circle, and at the compass points there may be there'll be at least one what we call nexus point, which is the source of the root of your particular house that you may draw magic from, and no other house may draw from that source. There can be up to 2 at the moment per faction, depending on the scenario. Some scenarios only have 1 each, and some scenarios have 2 each, which obviously generate a lot more energy. But they are at fixed points, and you only generate, or you can only draw action points from them, or what we call power tokens, if you start the game round within 6 inches of one or more of those markers. So, in addition to wanting to defeat your opponent via damaging them via your spells or controlling them via your spells, there is also you have to keep in mind positioning. The positioning of the model based on the range of attacks is one thing, but you also have to keep an eye on, are you going to be in range to generate your resource for the next turn? Is your opponent going to be in range to generate the resource? How much resource can they generate? How much can you generate? And certain of the wizards will have the ability to interfere with placement of a model. So one of the strong things that they might do is to push opponents outside of their ability to draw extra magical energy, which is a massive advantage, or the ability to move outside their own boundaries and get extra moves to move back when they've expended their magical reserves. So 6 inches, wizards can draw from Nexus points. Nexus generally generate 2 extra magical actions around, which, as I said, may be stored. So that's how they do it.
All right. So, and I think you said it. I just blanked it as I was going back over it in my head. But do I generate any? I don't generate any magic normally on my own. I have to go to the Nexus point to be able to pull the magic out.
That's right. So,
okay,
every model generates mundane actions because every living model, there is a line in the rulebook that says living models get this, implying that there are non-living models coming up, and in time there will be. But living models can do things without the aid of magic. Otherwise, as a species, wouldn't be very effective. But in order to access greater power or more power, the power to do more things, they have to go to the Nexus points to draw from the roots of magic to power their greatest spells that they know. Each wizard will have at least one ability and one attack spell that simply can't be cast on turn 1 and perhaps even game round 2. You have to build up if you want to do it. Some players choose rarely to use those spells because they would rather do many things. So they would take the extra actions and make more moves, make more small attacks, make more small abilities, and abilities do various things like teleport wizards or teleport opposing wizards or move each model or terrain pieces or generate forests to block line of sight or walls of stone or empower the weapons of themselves or allies, various things that they might just want to do a range of things to provide a more flexible output that round. Or some players like to be very cagey, store up a lot of energy and then release it in a devastating blast at their opponent to try and put them on the back foot, because when you do that level of damage, the opposing wizard has to react. They can't take that again because they're going to be not very long for this world if they just keep on taking that whilst they're trying to set up and do all these small little actions. So a lot of ways to play on top of the different styles of wizard. They can do different things. They each have 4 or 5 abilities and 4 or 5 attacks, which is a large range of actions that you could possibly take in a turn. And on top of that, there are a number of universal things that all models can do, such as walking, climbing, charging, interacting with objective pieces and terrain pieces. So there are, depending on how many actions you've got, you can certainly find lots and lots of things to do, and it's a matter of trying to figure out what's good for me this round and what's potentially bad for my opponent, what's going to hurt them, and what's going to be good the next round and maybe even the round after that, and trying to keep that in your mind whilst at the same time trying not to leave your sphere of influence where you're going to generate your maximum resource, and at the same time trying to encourage or force your opponent to leave theirs. And that's where the strategy comes in.
That's pretty fun. I like that. How can I get you to leave your area, or force you to leave your area, or do whatever else to disrupt, especially if you're sitting there just being a battery of magical energy.
Yep. And on top of that, we have a number of scenarios that will force a model in order to score objective points, which can help you win the game swiftly and not rely on killing the opponent. Some of the scenarios require wizards to leave their areas of comfort as well. So they're on top of all of the other tactical elements. You can also play with we've got 4 different scenarios at the moment, and each of those scenarios require the wizards to do something different in order to score objective points. So one of them is chase a magic orb around and keep tagging it in order to score points. And this and the problem with the orb is it doesn't like to be tagged, and it will run away from you when you tag it. You have to keep on chasing it. So you get the spectacle of these, potentially old hobbled wizards in long cloaks chasing after this magical orb around the board. So it's a bit of a madcap zany one. That one. Another scenario is it's called the Bells of Lao Tzu, in which wizards have to take interact actions with magical bells in order to summon demons that they have to collaboratively defeat before they're allowed to turn on each other. So it's completely different idea. Instead of movement and chasing an objective piece all around the board in crazy locations, there are 3 fixed points within the dueling circle. You've got to interact with each of them in one round. If you do that, a demon pops out. Together, although actually most of the time it's not together. You're working against each other whilst you're supposedly working together. You've got to defeat that demon and then ring the bells again, and you get a bigger demon, and then you've got to defeat that demon, and then you've got to ring the bells again. And you get the third and final and hugest and ugliest demon. And only when you defeat that demon are you allowed to fight each other, because everyone knows that you've got to kill demons first. When these guys are the bad guys in the storyline, the Diabolists are always trying to summon up demons, and in my storyline, demons are generally awful wormy type things with big fanged mouths that like eating you without your permission. And so even factions that are considered to be maybe not the nicest, they understand that their job is to banish demons first, and then after that they can go back to the business of stoving each other's heads in with maces and so forth. So
nice.
Very different scenarios. There's a couple more on top of that. I won't go into too much detail, but each one prompts the wizard to behave in ways different from the others, which may be completely counterintuitive for the way the wizard would normally like to play. And on top of that, you have the large range of actions, and on top of that, you have the different ways to generate power that you can use in the game and actions that you can use in the game. And so even though you might have a very simple, what I believe is a very simple rule set, it's I'd say if you took out lots of the diagrams, it's probably 20 odd pages of rules, and hopefully very simply laid out, so easy to pick up. You can have a very simple rule set with very definitive, in this scenario, if you roll this happens, and if you roll that happens. Very clear to follow, but you add levels of complexity on top of the rules instead of making the rules necessarily very complex. So easy to pick up, but hopefully quite difficult to master. I know I find it difficult to master, and I made the damn game. I always get my ass handed to me in these games, but it's very complex if you want it to be, but also very mindless and fun if that's the way you want to play it.
It's always interesting, when you talk to the creator of a game, they're, especially when they've got that, one player, they may have even play tested, with that player a lot. And they're like, this person just always kicks my ass at my own game. I don't understand it, but it's interesting because you get this perception as the creator of the game of this is how my game plays. And then somebody else comes along and goes, oh yeah, I can see how that's how that game plays, but this is how I'm going to play it.
Exactly. And you can't predict everything that's going to happen in the ways that people think. I've got a good example for the recent Kickstarter. A friend and I were doing some play testing for the Apprentice Wizards, the Acolytes, and he was using one faction, I was using another faction. I think he was using House Qing, which is the House of Mysteries, which is kind of like the Imperial Chinese looking faction, and I think I was using maybe the House of Fear. And there was a combination involved that he discovered in that game that I never thought of. I'd created the models, I created the characters. I can tell you what they think, what they like to eat. I can tell you all these things about them. I can tell you about the rules, why I designed the rules. But there was an interaction between these two characters that fit their personas. They're very cruel, haughty, vain people, and he had a combination where he forced me to do all of his objectives for him, and I'd never even thought of that. that it was possible. And that's one of the joys of creating a game. You create something, you set very loose boundaries, because you don't want to be too prescriptive and force people to play only the way you want them to. And then you let people run with it, and they will always find something more than you have found, and they will always expand it in innovative ways that, if you're a sensible person, you will go with, you'll run with, rather than try to lock it back and say, no, you're playing outside the box. And that's one of the things I found since I've created my own game. I might consider myself to be a pretty competent gamer. I've been playing since I think 1989 is probably the first game I played. Over the years, I've played in various games, and certainly played in many tournaments, and for a long time was a tournament player, and not for many years. And I consider myself to be no easy mark, and yet people will come up with these crazy combinations based off the models that I've made. So it's certainly humbling, but also an entertaining experience.
It certainly sounds like it, and certainly is. And actually, I can relate to that whole. You can have a way of doing things, but people still find the odd ways or different ways of doing something. I used to teach programming, and most people, when you think of programming, you think, okay, you've got to write it in a certain way. It is amazing how many different ways, especially when you're teaching brand new people how to program. It's amazing all of the different ways that they come up to write something. The same things, it's, it's hilarious. And then, testing it. I had one student one time go, I wrote this program. There is no way you can break it.
Well, what a boast.
I know. I'm like, oh, really? And so, walked up, tapped a couple things, hit enter, and all of a sudden, his program just started, kind of going into this endless loop of crashing. And he was like, never thought of someone doing that. I'm like, and that's where you made that mistake.
Yeah, my day job is software testing, so I completely understand and live that every day. I think the thing is not to be prescriptive about what you're trying to do. I'm making a game because it's something I've always wanted to do. Okay, it's not my official day job. It's my second job, or as I like to call it, my third child. And it's something that is a labor of love rather than a method of generating revenue. For me, anyway. I know other people have different business models, and good luck to them, and they're doing very well, etc., etc. But for me, I'm doing something I love, and I'm trying to share that joy with other people, and try and bring them into the game and see the benefits of playing this game. And so I don't want to be prescriptive. I don't want to tell you how, if you pay me for some of these lovely models that I've made, and I haven't really mentioned the models very much yet, but I certainly will go into a bit more detail if you give me the opportunity. But if you give me some of your hard-earned money to buy, not a lot, by the way, just as another plug, a small amount of your hard-earned money to buy some of the lovely Roots of Magic models, then I don't really want to be sitting there telling you what you have to be doing with them all the time. I want to create a framework that says to you, okay, here's some rules you can use. Here's some scenarios you can play. Here's some ideas to start with. Feel free to add any elements you want. If you can think of anything, or if a number of people can think of anything, I'll go off and create some rule sets for it. I'll work with you rather than say, what, that's not in my vision. You're not having that. And I think that's what you have to do these days. As we said earlier, it's a golden age of gaming. I've created a game that isn't necessarily a competitor for other games. It's an addendum to other games. My game, you can play in, 25 to 45 minutes around your other games that you might play. I mean, as an example, I play Age of Sigmar. I know not everyone does. I used to play Warhammer Fantasy. I know many people love that game. I know I did. I play Age of Sigmar. If I want to play a game of that versus one of my friends, it's going to take me a couple of hours, okay, to play that one game. If I have a gaming evening, which is pretty common over here, about 3, maybe 4 hours if you're lucky, once a week, then I can reliably play one game of that that game, and based on setting up and talking and having a beer and having a joke, shooting the breeze as we all do, it's very unlikely you're going to get a second game in unless you're very serious and you don't really have any breaks and you cut the chit chat and you just want to play the game. It's very hard to have a second game. My game is designed not only to be played on your kitchen table if that's what you want to do versus, a relative or a friend that you live with or someone that's coming to visit or whatever. It's designed to be played very quickly. So our gaming hours are extremely precious. So I want to maximize every minute that we get in terms of if you go out to a gaming club, you've got an extra 40 minutes to play. Well, you can't play many games in that, or you can play very potentially unsatisfactory, hobbled versions of those games just to play something. Well, now I want to offer another solution to that. If you add 1 or 2 models more, that's it. You can play a completely other game, right? As long as you've got some D10 on you, all the other accoutrements, measuring devices and everything else you've already got. If you play miniatures games, you've got all that stuff.
Right.
But add a couple more models, add some D10, and I can give you I can fill up the rest of the time you have with entertainment that can be as complex and competitive as you want, or as silly and laugh about stupid named spells as you want. I can provide that, and that's what the game's designed to be, not to try and take people away from existing games, because there's just so many good ones. I'd have to be the most egotistical person in the world to believe that I'm going to steal people from Frostgrave, or I'm going to take over Malifaux's crown or whatever. I'm not trying to do that. I like those games as well. I'm trying to further enrich people's gaming time by offering them something that can fit into the small amounts of time that sometimes we have to play a game. And that's how I'm marketing the game. And
that's it's an awesome fact, is that, in this golden age of games, there are so many options. I know when I'm going up to, the local game store here, or, over to a friend's house, and it's like, all right, well, we're thinking about playing this or this or this, I'm like, all right, what do I want to bring with me? What am I, feeling like playing? And, what games are, well, one of the key things is, what game is a, small enough count that I can get multiple games in, for, models and all of that, so what can I, and then I usually, even after picking the small game, I then, pick like 2 or 3 more to fill everything up to bring with me. But it's so nice. I like it, versus 40K or Kings of War, where you've got all of these models, all these men, Kings of War or Warhammer Fantasy Battle, when you had the movement trays and all that, I've come to really, really appreciate skirmish games alone, because they have so much depth to them. And, small skirmish games, large skirmish games, they all have that, little bit of character to them to make them fun. Whether it's something from your level of it's one model versus one model, but we're supposed to be doing epic spells. One of the things you mentioned is I grow a forest just to block your line of sight so that you can't throw something at me. Give me a second to breathe. I can imagine that, something happens, you get knocked back or something like that. You're kind of breathing hard and you see that, your opponent's like charging up to do something. You're like, hey, trees, there we go. And, you're just, using them for cover to be able to basically bob and weave away.
Exactly.
And that just, the other part is it creates such a narrative. You can get attached to that model. And, even speaking into that and, having been looking at your store, actually, I've looked at it before. There was one model that, really caught my eye. And And then when I went and looked at it a little bit more, and it's Luther Draxos of House Durant. So it's got a story, and he was fighting some demons and Diabolus and all that, and he ends up losing his arm, and now he's got a magical arm replacing it, and he's got this hammer in it.
Yeah,
just the pose of the mini, because as you said, you haven't actually spoken a lot about the miniatures or anything like that. They're beautiful. I love the look of the minis. They're high detailed, and especially in a small game like this, you kind of need to be. You can't do a Perry's miniatures to a game of just 1, 4, 5, 10 characters. It doesn't work nearly as well as if you have that beautiful miniature. And these are beautiful.
Thank you for saying so. I'm glad you can recognise that a lot of effort has gone in on our behalf. Well, I say our. I keep on saying our. It's my behalf plus the very talented people that I've found to work with over the years. You're right. When you've got a single point of focus, you couldn't possibly put down models. You mentioned the Perry's models. Their models are wonderful in the games in which they're designed for. They're exactly the right thing for those games. They're the right tool for the right job. For the Roots of Magic, for potentially one model versus one model, then there's got to be something a bit more special. In addition, you're dealing with that fantastical, magical element. People's expectations rise. They don't necessarily just want a guy standing there chewing on an apple looking nonchalant, right? That's probably not going to sell, or maybe it will sell. I don't know. Maybe that'll be one of my new magical houses, the fruit-consuming wizards. But I've created. It's a human-based game. I think the first non-human model that isn't a demon is going to be released along with the acolytes, but I'm not going to digress into that. But it's a human-based game, and there's a range of human styles, ages, gender. You name it. We've got old ladies. We've got. I think in the next release we've got a young, an 11-year-old girl who's actually the most powerful of all of the wizards. We've got big guys, we've got small guys. There are a range of different human looks. It's not all. Some companies historically have had very uniform looks of models, and you kind of wonder, well, I almost gave the game away by using the catchphrase of the game, but in the far future, certain people just all look the same. I didn't want to do that. I want the game to be representative of humanity, right? It has this fantastical, magical element, but it's representative of humanity. So you get good people, you get bad people, you get old people, you get young people, you get men, you get women. That's what the models represent. Plus, on top of that, you've got some of the models are fairly low key because that's their character. So you might have noticed there's a kind of burly looking religious guy who seems to be beckoning you to come closer to receive a benediction, and but if you turn that guy around, he's holding a giant war mace behind his back because he belongs. His name is Friar Sarpeth. He's quite a disreputable rogue of a character. He belongs to Acedia, the House of Suggestion, and their power is to make you believe whatever they want you to make you believe. And their big shtick at the moment is having a giant religious crusade to bring morals back to Malorian because it's become a very wanton place in their opinion. And they do that by making you think these guys are really nice. I want to listen to what they have to say because they're there for the little man. They're there for me. I'm not making any political statements. You read into that whatever you want, but these were designed a long time ago. So, nothing too recent, but actually he's a very big, strong, burly warrior pretending to be a man of peace. And the model on the one side is like welcoming you with open arms, and on the other side he's going to hit you with a giant war mace, which is, it's not there for tickling. It's there for murderizing. He's a bad man. And so he's one of the low key ones, but there's another model called Amara, who is from Travium, the House of Power, and they're all about big, explosive, bombastic displays of magic. The bigger and more exciting, that's where they are. And she has chains of energies flowing around her person as she's levitated in the air. So, nothing low-key necessarily about her.
No. I'm looking at her, and actually, the Friar did catch my eye. So, it was funny when you mentioned him, because I had Luther and the Friar open in 2 different windows. And then you mentioned him, and I was like, oh, yeah, let me click over to this window. Because I had seen him and, been like, yeah, he's, kind of welcoming. And then you said, and he's got a big mace behind his back. I'm like, wait, where's that picture? Wait a minute here. And so, yeah, I saw that, and I'm like, oh, this must be your nice kind of, priestly guy. And
no, I'm playing on the cleric trope. Basically, he's more like a despotic or chaotic evil cleric, but he's not really a cleric. He's just dressed in a cassock to make you think he is, because his magic is so powerful that just to listen to his voice, which is why his subtitle is The Voice of Dark Wisdom, because just to hear him speak makes you think, well, actually he's making very good points, even though he's telling you to do very stupid things that will not leave you with any benefits, will in fact cost you a great deal, but will help him a great deal. But it sounds like a great idea if you hear him. The moment you stop hearing his voice, maybe it's not such a great idea. But that's his power. He's a very powerful warrior, but with magical infused charisma that can make you make silly decisions, and that's his big shtick. Whereas for someone like Amara, who is all about showing you these magical energy chains, her backstory is that she's a freed slave, and her time in captivity have obviously had a massive psychological effect on her, and it manifests itself via her magic. So she's a very powerful magician, but she can't make anything appear. It's going to basically involve energy chains coming out of her hands and throttling you to death, or throwing you about the place, or blowing rocks into atoms with her rage at her confinement and the horrible history that her and her family had to suffer. So each of the characters, you can look at the model and you can kind of get an idea about their character, and you can look into it in any more detail. But I always like stories, and one of the big drivers for me making my own game was, of course, I wanted to make the game, but I also like to write stories, so I write the stories for the game. And I get to explore the characters in a greater detail and invite the people that are, because there are many, many different flavors of gamer out there. Some like raw statistics and like to figure out combinations, and what the model is and what it does isn't necessarily their highest concern. And there are some that focus very heavily on the story, and they want to be playing in the way that character thinks and acts, and they want to get into that level of detail. And because I'm all about adding choices, not just of how you play, but how you can think about the game that you're playing, I like to add stories to reveal more about these characters, what motivates them, what they like, what they're afraid of, what their grand ambitions are, or what kind of organizations they're a part of, and what those organizations' ambitions are. And through that, and I mentioned this right at the beginning of my rambling diatribe about the game, not diatribe, I suppose is a bad word, but my rambling discussion about the game is that it's a story-driven game in which the story evolves. Okay, each of these characters exist in a grand story that maybe is not immediately visible to players of the game. Small segments of that story are slowly becoming more and more visible until a general skeletal narrative is now existent. The land of Malorian is under attack from within. The forces of the Diabolists, which in years past had been a minor cult, they would be found and be executed because obviously it's a blood cult, so that they don't get together and make pies. They get together and sacrifice unwilling victims, but it was easily stamped out. But in recent years it's become extremely organized, sophisticated, and widespread, and it's overloading the abilities of House Merc, which is kind of like as I said earlier, the kind of judges of the peace in a creepy way. It's overloading their abilities to support it. It's overloading the soldiery of the 9 city-states that make up the land of the continent of Minorian, and it's about figuring out why that's happening now and what role in this overarching story each of these characters have, because they all have a key role. Some of them in this particular story, for example, I'm not going to reveal too much by saying that Luther Draxos is one of the focal points of this particular story, this story arc. But in other arcs, some of the other wizards will certainly take much more of a leading role, but they're certainly all involved in this one. And it's over time, I'll reveal more what's going on. I'll introduce new characters, new wizards or guardians or servants, as I alluded to earlier, and each story will kind of give you more information about what's really going on. Where are we leading to? What's going on behind these wizards that's making all this evil happen in the land, and how are these wizards going to deal with it? Some of them might think it's a great thing. Let's get on board with evil.com, and many will not, and some might surprise. So, for example, I had a tournament the last week, I think the Saturday before last, in which one of the prizes for victory, along with all the normal models and congratulations and the adulation of many fans, was that you could select a wizard that would intentionally or inadvertently do something that would allow a priceless relic to fall into the hands of the Diabolists to further their aims. And that's not good, obviously, because it makes the bad guy stronger. But in addition to a story being written about that, which is cool because you can say that you made that happen, you chose that person, you forced this event to come into being, that character, that wizard, will also receive what's called an ascended version. In a future wave of releases, it will get a new model. So the character will be updated with new abilities, new spells, a new model, and potentially a new characteristic or a new outlook on in the backstory. And the model that was selected was Mother Yulia, the Bride of the Moon, who is the kind of crotchety-looking old lady with the grizzly bear.
Well, that's awesome that she'll get a cooler version. Might not be so awesome that she is going to lose an artifact. I don't know. That makes me sad because she is up there with one of my favorites.
Yeah. So in the story, it's bad times. There is no silver lining at the moment. There is no potential happy ending from what people can see. It's just things are getting really fucked up really quickly. And because she's a very stubborn character, her personality might allow, if she had the chance to revenge herself on a rival or to do the right thing, she could easily sway either way, and in fact more in the way of, screw what happens to everyone else. I want to get even with this person, and in doing something like that, I'm not saying that's the story, but in doing something like that, a mistake could be made, or she could leave something open that means that the bad guys can win that battle. They can get hold of this relic that will have a very big connotation in the storyline. Okay, and the storyline is something that I care a lot about, and a lot of thought goes into it. This entire game is based on one element of a book that I've been writing forever that will obviously sit in development hell until the end of time. But I've written about 300,000 words. There's loads of characters, loads of countries, loads of races, and so I have an almost inexhaustible supply of new characters, themes, story arcs, invasion angles to work in, and this is just one small element of that. And hopefully I can get more and more people on board, replicate the success of the recent Kickstarter we have for Students of Sorcery to maybe release the next wave of Guardian models, which is my aim for the end of this year, which is, I've done nothing to hide. That's the model that I have to go with as a one-person show. But over time, the stories will build up, the character depth will build up, the number of characters. I'm already developing new wizards. I've got a couple in development right now. One of them is for House Merc. One of them is for the Order of Malleok, the Witch Hunters. And over time, everything's going to expand. The volume of models, the volume of scenarios, the abilities that are in the game, the conditions that are in the game. Currently, we have various number of conditions based on what I believe can happen in Magic. So you can transmute physical beings into other beings. So that's called the transmute condition. For example, Mother Yulia, that little old lady that, looks like she could give you a very, very severe scolding, but not much else. She happens to be the land's most fearsome wizard duelist. She has a number of over 30 confirmed kills, and a number of non-kills in which she shamed wizards by leaving them alive because she enjoys screwing with people's minds that way. It's because she can transmute herself from a elderly lady to a were-elderly lady. She can transform into a feral beast quite unexpectedly, and all of a sudden she's not kind of doddering, crawling after you with her staff. She's leaping around, cutting her throat with her talons and, drinking your warm blood and other crazy things. So, we've got various conditions in the game. That's just one of them. And they're only limited by imagination and obviously playtesting. If they're too good, we won't include them. We'll make sure that they don't get through. But, if you can think of crazy things that wizards can do, then they could potentially be in the game. And that's one of the benefits of a background that is fantasy and a background that is Magic, because, everyone already believes that Magic, you can do whatever you want. And so you don't have to worry about defining or limiting yourself to what is even possible within a fantastical background.
That's awesome. So now I don't notice a rule book in the web store, but I do notice a living rule book or living rules in your download section. So right now, is it available for download?
Absolutely, for free. So
awesome.
One of the big things about the Roots of Magic is that technically you never need give me a cent or give me a penny. The rules are free and they're updated. It's a living rulebook. Whenever testing or people's experiences or new rules are added, it gets immediately, or once playtesting is completed, added to the living rulebook, and a notification will go out and you can download it. In addition to that, the game cards are also available for download, so that you may, and they're not ameliorated or black and white versions or whatever. They're the full cards that you would expect to get. Okay, they're available for download as well, so you can immediately get the rules, the game cards, and use whatever models you have as proxies or counters or whatever you want. In addition, we've created little paper dolls, so you can print out some paper dolls and kind of glue the sides together, and they're of the artwork of the wizards, and use them to represent the model. So technically, if you were of a mind to do that, you could go to the website, download all of these things, immediately get to playing once you've read the rules, and as I said, they're not that difficult to pick up, and you never need to hear from me again if that's the way you want it. Or if you do all of those things and you think the game is entertaining, you want to learn more, you can go back to the website, read the story sections, the background sections that look more not just at the wizards, not just at the overarching story, but you're looking at things like parts of the society. What are the great houses? What do they do? What are their ambitions? What kind of society is Malorian based on that isn't necessarily magical? The mundanity of the 9 city-states, each of them run by a kind of merchant prince that don't necessarily get on with each other, and each of them have their own trade, their own key elements that make them one of the 9 key players in this giant continent. And you can learn those things. And then you can go to the web store, and yes, there are a number of models to buy. I believe they're very high quality. I spent 6-7 months researching artists, researching sculptors, being rebuffed by certain artists and certain sculptors that work for very famous companies that didn't either have the time or the inclination to work with this person I never heard of before. So I really had to dig deep and find great people, like hidden diamonds. And I think if people have a look at the models, that they can agree. I'm hopefully not being too arrogant in saying that they are very nice models. And if people like the models, they can purchase them. They're generic humans doing wizardy things. So they're good for your role-playing games. They're good for other games that don't necessarily have a set model offering with the rules. We know which games those are. Or you can use them for my game, which is 100% free at this present time. In the future, who knows, it might change. But right now, if you download it, those rules will never dramatically changed because they've been play tested to death, and they're very simple and they work. So why would I want to change them every few minutes? As I said, I'm not trying to buy a new house with this. I'm doing it because I've always wanted to do it. And, I've always wanted to write short stories for fantasy. I've always wanted to make my own game. I'm doing that now. And people buying the models, all that does is allows me to keep doing it. As long as people are interested and want to buy the models and want to play the game, I'll keep making scenarios, I'll keep making rules, and I'll keep writing stories. And that's the agreement, Support the game, and I'll support you playing the game.
And that's an awesome agreement to have. I like that a whole lot because, a living game is amazing when you can get new content, especially not especially, but it's a whole lot easier when you don't have to pay or not pay a lot. That's actually what I love about the Frostgrave expansion, since we have mentioned that other ominous Magic user game.
Yeah, it's fine. I have nothing against it. I love the game. I own the books. I don't get to play many games these days except for my own, because I've got a couple of very young kids and I've got a day job and I've got this job. But I've played the game and I've enjoyed it. And I understand why people love it. It's a great idea, and they've done very well. But I don't have to worry about it because I'm not trying to compete with it. You can use my wizards for Frostgrave Wizards all you want. I'm happy if you're happy that the models are good, and I've made something good that you enjoy using. You've paid for it. You may use it in any way you wish, and I completely support that. And I'd be glad to, just as glad to see people using those models for various things as I am. Of course, for the Roots of Magic, I love it because I've created it myself. But it's, as I keep saying, just about creating options. The models are just one option. You want to buy a nice model? I can help you out with that. You want to use that model how you want to use it? That's your call. You paid the money. You own the goods.
And that is awesome. Of course, and I will encourage people, go buy the models because the models are fantastic looking. I like them quite a bit. I just have to choose some. That's the hard part.
That's the curse of the gamer.
The curse.
Trying to figure out what you want.
Well, no. See, the curse of the gamer is I want them all. It's what can I get?
Yeah, but you have to go through the rigmarole of telling yourself you're only going to get the one thing. So you're going to narrow that down. You're going to go through these hoops to try and figure out, these are the ones for me. And then 2 weeks later, they're all for you. That's how it works.
Yeah,
for me at least.
You just slowly, find that they keep adding themselves to the cart. You're like, hey, I told you no.
Yeah.
It's
a magical game. They add themselves by magic.
Exactly. It's kind of like Toy Story. They just come alive, go where they want. You don't remember it. It's like a puppy. It followed you home. Can I keep it, honey? And she tells you no, and you just kind of sulk off, and just don't tell her that you didn't get rid of it till it's too late.
Well, you better be careful, because if Sarpeth comes alive, then identity fraud will be happening on a grand scale. That guy he'll be stealing your stuff. He'll come back, your house will be foreclosed. He'll be sitting there with a big cigar on your lawn.
Well, that just went toy soldiers level.
Yeah.
All right, so we are coming up to the end of our time. I do want to thank you for coming on, and I want to give you a couple minutes to go ahead and shout out to all the listeners where they can find you on that great big vast thing we call the internet.
The interwebs, which I recently have figured out how to use, being an old person. If you want to learn more about the Roots of Magic, there's a very easy location to go to. It's therootsofmagic.com, very simple. The website will give you all the information about the game, the ability to download the rules, as I've said, look at the artwork for the models. There's a web store if you're inspired to purchase anything. In addition, it also gives you the details for our Facebook page. Just type in the Roots of Magic on Facebook, you'll find us. We also have a tactics Facebook group called the Dueling Circle, which of course you may join if you would like to discuss the game in a more tactical sense. We're on Twitter as well. Hashtag the Roots of Magic. I'm not very imaginative in that respect. It's the Roots of Magic everywhere. You type it into something, you will find us very quickly, because there aren't that many Wizard dueling arena games out there, thankfully for me at the moment. So we'll be pretty high up on the search return on Google, I should imagine. If you want to contact me, there are contact options, obviously via Twitter or Facebook, naturally, or via the website. There's a contact option. I'm super keen in this game, so I do get back very quickly. If you have any questions you want to ask, feel free.
Awesome. Well, Des, it's been great. I loved hearing about the game. As you said from the beginning, you actually mentioned that if I let you, you would just go on and on. And well, honestly,
that's what I did.
I kind of like that, because I could feel the passion. It makes me excited. I want to print out some little cutout cards until I get some other people, and just throw some dice and zap some wizards.
Sure thing. Who doesn't?
So, I don't know. There's probably someone out there that's like, well, this is stupid. But we don't like that person, because they probably just don't like anything.
I like that person. I invite that person to just have a little bit of a look, have a chat with me. I'll win them over. Don't you worry.
There we go. That's the salesman right there. That's the business side of the house coming out. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in to another episode of Skirmish Supremacy. There's some number here. It'll be at the beginning, and eventually we'll actually start counting our episodes again. Thank you, and everyone have a good night or day, whenever you listen to it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Skirmish Supremacy. To see more of the antics that Nick and I do, you can check us out on Facebook at Skirmish Supremacy. We also have Twitter, which we can be reached at Skirmish Supreme, because apparently Skirmish Supremacy does not fit in Twitter. And if you want to email us directly, you can reach us at tim@skirmishsupremacy.com or nick@skirmishsupremacy.com. Thanks for listening.